There should always be animals in bookstores, I think. There should be animals just everywhere, I think, more than they currently are.
What are some places that you think need animals?
I mean, bars 100%. Bars should always have a dog. Like that should be a law.
Welcome to Shoulda Books, the podcast about all the books you should have read by now. My name is Jonathan, and today I am talking to author Andrew Martin. I have been a fan of Andrew for years now. His first two books, the novel Early Work and the short story collection Cool for America, are two of my personal favorites. I really do love these books, and I really love his new book, which is called Downtime. It's available right now via FSG. This book is so funny. It's so just clever in a way that as a writer, I'm really jealous of. And as a reader, I just love to savor. He's one of my favorite writers. That's the only way to put it. So today is kind of a big deal for me. If you really want to hear me fangirl, you can check out the ad-free extended version of this episode, which is available on the Shoulda Books Patreon. You can see me talk about how much his first novel, Early Work, really meant to me. But this book, Downtime, is so much fun. We discuss that a little bit. We talk about the books that he brought. He brought some excellent books, and we have a great discussion. Now, housekeeping. We're nearing the end of our March book. That is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. If you want to follow along, head on over to Fable. And I think that's it. So let's get into my conversation with Andrew Martin, and let's hit the books. Andrew Martin, welcome to Shoulda Books. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking in kind of the Patreon cold open, which of course you can find at patreon.com/shoulda-books. I'm so bad at plugging. It doesn't feel natural. I always stumble over the URLs and links and things like that. But anyway, we're talking about, I've been a fan of your work for some time. You have a new novel coming out. It's called Downtime. Can you tell folks a little about yourself and a little about this book?
Yeah, I mean, this is my my second novel and my third book. And I feel like I've sort of been writing through my life in a way. And this book is very much about characters in their 30s as they are trying to navigate some of the thorniest questions that one has to navigate about whether they're going to get married and stay with their partners, whether they're going to have kids, where they're going to live, just like how they're going to live their lives. And then at the same time as that's happening, which was also true in my mid-30s, the pandemic happens. And so it's sort of I don't think of it quite as a pandemic novel so much as one in which the pandemic like interrupts life and ends up getting in its way, and the characters have to sort of keep living and keep figuring themselves out in the midst of all these obstacles that arise.
When did you start writing this? Did you start writing it while it was happening, or did it take some processing time before you circled back?
No, I started writing it in September 2020.
Oh, wow.
So it's really in the thick of it.
Yeah, man. It's I think we're all so kind of desperate to just forget all of that I think that there's kind of a dearth of art and entertainment like about it, but it's such a pivotal event. Like it is, the ramifications are, I mean, we're still dealing with the fallout of it, and we'll continue to.
Well, that's why it feels important, and interesting. And, if it just felt obligatory, it wouldn't be interesting, I think. But to me, it's like, how did this affect our emotional lives? How did this affect our sense of intimacy? How did this affect our like way of being in the world? And obviously there's the massive, completely like, who knows what would have happened politically in the world if not for this series of dominoes.
Sure.
But for me, I'm like much more interested always in my work in like sort of the intimacy of life and the way that the sort of outer world encroaches on people's lives and the way that they get by with each other. Sort of like a domestic politics more than I don't know, national or global politics.
What were some ways you feel like you changed in the pandemic?
I mean, I think one good outcome, maybe, if it can be said to be, is it did feel like, in a way, I realized I could be brave and realized I could get through something really difficult. My wife is a doctor and was working in New York hospitals at the height of things here in the city, and it was it was pretty intense. And I feel like she did the hard work, but I felt like I stood up to the real fear of it and stayed in the pocket, and and we kind of like it brought us even closer together, and it just like it felt like kind of going through this real crucible of fire. And I think we came out the other side just as like tougher, slightly traumatized people.
Well, we'll see if this is a good segue. Speaking of traumatizing, you sent me the list of your books, and it sounds like it might be relevant. You have brought 3 books today that you think everyone should read. Let's get into them. What is the first book that you brought?
Maybe I'll start with the Radetzky March by Joseph Roth, which is truly, I think, in my top, I don't know. It's hard for me to account because I'm such an obsessive reader, but probably top 5 novels of all time. I just think it's such an incredible book.
I was not familiar with this book before you sent it to me. Can you tell folks a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, well, and also I feel like I had a little bit of an agenda of bringing to light a couple of novels that I think are genuinely like among the greatest books ever published, but are like slightly under the level of the books that everybody knows about. So I just want to spread the good word.
We all know the Da Vinci Code is the best and the pinnacle. So you don't need to, belabor the point.
I mean, it's got Da Vinci right in the title.
It's got Da Vinci. Da Vinci wrote it. It was his code.
In addition to inventing the helicopter.
Yeah. He created Pig Latin, actually. A lot of people don't know that.
Is that true?
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
What didn't he do?
Yeah.
Okay, the Radetzky March is about it's sort of about a family dynasty of soldiers in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and sort of the first character we meet is an infantry soldier, and at a famous battle, the Battle of Solferino. This guy saves the emperor's life, saves Franz Joseph's life by grabbing him and taking a bullet for him. And so he becomes a baron. He becomes Baron von Trotta, and is given like every bit of military pomp and honor that you can get. And then one day his son is reading his little like school textbook, like his first little reader, and the first story in the book is about the brave exploits of the hero of Solferino. And they've made the story like completely different. They've like had him like riding on a steed and killing 20 enemies, and his sense of honor is so hurt by this, even though it makes him into a hero, that he goes like all the way to the top. He goes to the emperor and is like, "This is a lie. This cannot stand." And the emperor's like, "Buddy, you've just gotta deal with it. Like it makes us both look good. Like let's let's call it." And he is so upset that he like resigns from the military, and it's taken out of the book. And so he's like the family is sort of the secret heroes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the book then follows the next 2 generations of men in the family as they sort of struggle with both this like vision of their like heroic past, and also with the world as it sort of inexorably moves towards World War I and the end of the empire, and sort of the end of the whole way that they understood the world to exist up until 1914.
How much of real history is incorporated in this book?
Well, I assume a lot. As someone who knows about history mostly from books, movies, and artworks, this is like most of what I know about the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I learned from this book and some other novels of the time. So I'm guessing this is basically true.
I mean, look, I know very, very little. So it is interesting though, when you said, Franz Joseph, was that Franz Ferdinand's father or grandfather? Or because Franz Ferdinand who was assassinated. That's what started World War I.
Yes.
So
yeah.
okay, so it's
I think he's his nephew.
Oh, classic. They love nephews.
Though this will be, I'm not that embarrassed if I don't know, but I'm sure hopefully someone will know and tell us.
You know what? That's the great thing about talking on the internet is the quickest way to get the right answer is to say the wrong answer. So we're going to say that he was actually Dwight Eisenhower's dad. So that's the official stance.
Little known.
And people don't know that. It was actually Da Vinci. It was him. But do you read a lot of historical fiction?
Well, I think I don't like it. Like, I think as a genre, it's not something I want to read. And I write exclusively about contemporary life. But then when I think about it, I realize that many of my favorite novels are historical fiction in some way or another. Like War and Peace, for one, was written, about a period like many, many years previous to when it was written. One of my favorite novelists is Penelope Fitzgerald, and she writes these incredible historical novels. They're often very short, which is not how you think of a historical novel. But she has this incredible book called The Beginning of Spring that's about Russia right before the Russian Revolution. And so I don't seek them out, but then I find myself suddenly like realizing that they compose a decent portion of like the books I love.
And we'll get back to the Radetzky March in a second, but what sort of books do you like? Do you have a specific genre that you like to read the most, or do you read pretty widely and eclectically?
I read widely, but I'd say if there's a book in the store that tells me it's about writers and their struggle to find themselves and figure out their place in the world, and maybe like a rivalry between writers, and maybe some people also have sex with each other, I'd say like that plot description, I've bought so many books that's all I know about it, and I'm rarely disappointed, frankly.
It's kind of an easy sell for me too.
Or anything French that's like about someone like giving up their regular life and deciding to just like live a life of like torrid sex and art making. There's like a really rich subgenre that I would highly recommend.
What would be a good example of that subgenre that you would want to recommend?
Oh, there's this writer, Constance Debray, and she was like kind of a aristocratic lawyer in Paris, and then she decided that she said goodbye to all that and like shaved her head and left her husband and just started sleeping with women and writing about it. And she has a great book called Love Me Tender that's like the first book in sort of a trilogy about that life, autofiction kind of stuff. Okay.
And what time period was that?
Oh, like nowish.
Oh, okay.
They're pretty recent books.
Gotcha. Okay. That sounds amazing. Getting back to the book at hand, the Radetzky March, how did this book find its way into your life?
It's a good question. I was trying to remember because I was rereading it over the last week, and I had that feeling of uncanniness where I was like, this book is sort of in my bones, but I have like no recollection of these words.
Yeah.
And so I must have read it at least a decade ago. I mean, the author Joseph Roth is the kind of writer who I really seek out and gravitate towards. It's like such an interesting life. Like, he was Jewish and he served in the First World War for the Austro-Hungarian army, and then became sort of like a roving peripatetic journalist and novelist. And so he was like in every major European capital. He saw, he was in Berlin, between the wars. He saw the rise of the Nazis. He, saw all the different revolutionary movements in all these different countries. And so he's just like He's like a character out of that the Wes Anderson movie.
The last couple ones have just kind of felt like the same movie of just Europe, 20th century Europe,
like the Grand Budapest Hotel. He's basically you could see him wandering in and like sitting in the corner of the hotel lobby taking notes on everybody walking through the door.
He's maybe got a pince nez and
absolutely.
This book, what are some things that you felt it kind of says about? This is such a broad question, just about life. Like, what are some of the kind of the big takeaways that you took from it?
The thing I was really very moved by reading it this time is how well he writes about fathers and sons, and the way that they are sort of baffled by each other and try to care for one another and sort of constantly fail to do so in all kinds of ways. The sort of the main character of the novel is this young military officer who is obsessed with his grandfather, who was the hero of Solferino. Yeah. And he sort of almost skips over his own father, who had like a much more lowly, district commissioner job that he doesn't find exciting or interesting. And so the father's almost envious of his son, but also like desperately trying to make his son like his own father. And the son has this like very grandiose vision of what his grandfather was like, even though he never met him. He thinks he's, the grand hero. And so it just really captures the sort of melancholy, I think, of these misunderstandings and the way that generations like really try to understand one another and often fail to do so.
Are there some like kind of myths in your family that like kind of hang over everything? You don't have to share if you don't want, but I'm always fascinated by people's kind of like familial myths.
Oh, absolutely. I think part of why I'm attracted to this book and also to one of the other books we're going to talk about, Grace Paley's work, is my mother's side of the family is Armenian, and there's a long, really dark history of death and destruction. And my great grandfather was a minister in Turkish Armenia and was one of the early people killed in the Armenian genocide. Because he was like fomenting revolution or fomenting independence, let's say.
Right, yeah.
And his children left for the U.S. before 1915, before he was killed and before a lot of people were killed. But it's a lot like in this book. There was a literal portrait of him that hung in my mother's house, sort of like very stern, bearded, turn of the century man, sort of glaring down at us, sort of reminding us of like the darkness and sadness of history.
Right.
And so that's like a sort of recurring thing in this novel, is like seeing the portrait of the hero and the grandfather and like trying to live up to him and trying to like understand the sacrifices he made and all this stuff.
Do you have any book recs for that chapter of history? It's something I don't know a whole, like the Armenian genocide. Like I know a tiny bit about it, but I don't know a whole lot about it. So it's something I've wanted to learn more about.
Yeah, there's an excellent sort of memoir / family history by Peter Balakian, always with the IAN, called Black Dog of Fate.
Okay,
that I
That's
think
a cool
is
title.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful book. And another one of his books is more of a proper like history book, specifically about like the U.S. and how they basically failed to intervene in the genocide in a timely way.
Yeah.
Called The Burning Tigress.
I wish that wasn't relevant.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus.
Turns out history just keeps on.
Turns out
coming back around.
It's really annoying how that happens. Yeah. But what's the next book you brought?
Let's do like a more contemporary one in between the war-ish books. But this is the collected stories of Grace Paley. and she really might be my all-time favorite short story writer. So I thought that was why I wanted to bring her to the table.
What do you look for in a short story? What makes a short story good for you?
For me, it's voice above everything. It's a sense immediately. I once interviewed a writer who told me they need gusto from the get-go. And so a short story, I feel like I want that voice to jump off the page and be kind of telling me something, whatever it is, whatever the subject is, something that is urgent, something that is interesting, something that feels like it has to be said.
I haven't read any Grace Paley. What is her voice like?
Well, it's very, I'd say, earthy and sort of Yiddish inflected. Like she grew up in New York City, the child of Jewish immigrants, working class. And so the stories are all steeped in sort of domestic life. They're steeped in, men and women, and they're steeped in a very sort of vernacular, voicey storytelling kind of tradition.
Do you remember the first short story of hers that you read?
Like it was yesterday.
Wow.
It was probably one of the most like influential stories I ever read. It's called Wants, and it's a very short story, and I read it in my in a creative writing class at Columbia when I was an undergraduate. And here, maybe I can just read you the beginning of it.
For sure, yeah.
Is that something we do?
Only if you do it in an accent, though. That is actually the rule.
Any accent.
Any accent. Yeah, it just can't be yours. Yeah. Go ahead.
It begins, I saw my ex-husband in the street. I was sitting on the steps of the new library. Hello, my life, I said. We had once been married for 27 years, so I felt justified. He said, What? What life? No life of mine.
Oh, man. That's I was like, I was kind of hoping you'd keep going.
We could just read the whole thing.
Let's just read the whole thing. Okay, and that story's called Once.
Yeah, WANTS.
Yeah. Okay.
And it ends up it's very short and compressed, but it sort of tells the story of their whole marriage in just this one encounter at the library.
Oh wow!
And this compression is just something she's incredible at.
I talked about this on another episode. When it comes to the time frame of a story, I love stories that don't take cover a short amount of time, but within that short amount of time, you get to see kind of the large swaths of time that are contained within that. I think that's something you do in your work very well, is like you're kind of following these characters for, not a super long amount of time, but you're getting a glimpse into the lives that they've lived and the years that they bring with them into any room that they enter. And so it sounds like this is something that Grace Paley does well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's also one of the things that stories can do that novels can't is give you this glimpse, give you this kind of entire world in a scene or even in a moment or a gesture. And there are story writers I love who almost have a more novelistic scale and scope. Like someone like Edward P. Jones is an incredible story writer, and some of his stories are 30, 35 pages long. Paley, she usually tops out at 15 pages max.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah. They're short. They're punchy.
Get a lot of it's all about the numbers. You just, you got to get your numbers up.
Your book, your number of books per year.
Number of books. Yeah. What's kind of your average BPY?
I really can't calculate it because I'm such a crazy scattershot reader. Where I'm in the middle of 10 books at once at any given time.
Oh man.
And there were a couple years where I did keep a list, and I really was glad that I did it. And it did kind of force me almost to finish more books so that I could write it on the list. It's something that in starting this podcast, I've really kind of started
learning about myself and learning just like, oh, the competitive, like there's a competitive side to me that wants number to go up, and it's like, I want to like put up these, and it's like, what are you doing? Like you shouldn't read for accomplishment. Like that shouldn't be the motivating factor, but I can't deny that it feels really good. I keep a note in my notes app for every year, and to like add another, another bullet point. Okay, this is, Did
you ever do like the Pizza Hut reading challenge as a youth?
Oh, so I did something similar. So I was homeschooled the entire run, K through 12. But I remember, and I lived a couple different places. I remember one public library we had, they did like a reading challenge, they did like a summer reading challenge, and they called it the Super Chicken. And it was like every 500 pages, you would get what they called a super chicken, but it was like, it was, for audio listeners, I'm holding up, about the size of a nickel. Like it was this tiny little thing. They probably bought them in bulk from, some wholesaler for like $5 for 1,000. And it was like, I don't think there was even any pizza involved. Like, I think it was just the bragging rights of like, oh, how many super chickens did you get this summer? And I remember I had a friend that I was like always in competition with, and he always, well, I haven't thought about this in years. He always beat me, and clearly I'm realizing in real time that maybe that had an effect. But tell me, so you actually got pizza? Interesting. Okay, yeah. Tell me, what was that like?
I was gonna say, like, it's only worth keeping score if you get pizza.
If you get pizza,
or something else at the end. Yeah, it was awesome, and I read a lot, so I mean, I feel like I was dining out on.
It was just Little Caesars all year long.
Well, the real question is, like, I mean, my parents would have bought me the pizza I wanted. So what was I so excited about? But I guess earning free pizza is pretty cool. Like,
especially as a kid, that sense of accomplishment. But yeah, okay. So Grace Paley, her stories are generally short, and so therefore you can get your numbers up. What are some other stories from this collection that you that really spoke to you?
Well, this week I was rereading. So this is she only, she lived a very long life, but she only published 3 collections of stories. So like every story she wrote is in this, like, not that thick book.
Yeah.
And so I was rereading the stories in her first collection, which is called The Little Disturbances of Man. And these stories, like, she kind of first found her voice as a writer very much like channeling family members, channeling this like sort of storytelling style. And so the first story in her first collection is called Goodbye and Good Luck. And it's narrated by an Aunt Rose who's telling stories about how she used to actually be it begins with, I used to be popular in certain circles. And it's basically about like the men that she attracted, even though she keeps talking about how even then she was fat, but she found that men found her very enticing. And the story kind of follows her affair with an actor in the Yiddish theater, a married actor in the Yiddish theater. And it's just, it's so funny and so warm and so generous about life. And I think that's Paley's great gift as a writer, is that she's just, you feel the generosity that she feels towards her characters. Like, she really loves the people that she writes about. But she's never sentimental. It's still like a sort of flinty, very talky, very argumentative style, which again reminds me of my Armenian family, my Armenian grandmother, now deceased. I think of her when I hear Grace Paley's voice on the page.
You mentioned that she was generous to her characters. What does that mean for you as a writer, being generous to your characters?
I think it means not being unnecessarily cruel about people, or not being narrow-minded about their capacities to surprise you on the page. I think like beginning writers, and then sometimes, I don't know, older writers who are cynical, they'll have characters who you can see what they're going to do. They're set up to be the bad guy or to represent goodness or whatever. and there's something sort of narrow and to me not that exciting about that. And so what I love about Paley and really all the literature I love is its capaciousness, its ability to see all the things that people can be and to somehow simulate that dimensionality on the page, which is very hard. And a lot of it involves sort of allowing for contradiction on the page, allowing for characters to say one thing and do something else, or allowing for them to just change their minds a lot. But I really like admire that quality in writers.
When you're working on a story, do you have a clear idea of the story structure, or do you kind of like basically create these characters and then let them kind of tell the story? Or is it maybe a mix of both? It's
more that latter. It's usually, I mean, every now and then I'll sort of, I mean, this used to be more true. Now that I'm old, my brain doesn't work this way as much. But it used to be true that I would sometimes like sort of see a story whole and be able to say like, oh, I can kind of see in a snapshot like what the likely trajectory of this story is. More often, I start with a line, with a voice, with a sort of situation, and then work my way through it and try to follow the characters through it and see what develops. And this novel was written very much that way, where it really didn't have a plan, and it sort of kept sprawling in all kinds of different directions. And that was, you know, the hard thing about writing that way is that then revision becomes like the thing that you have to spend so much time on.
Right.
Like trying to, you know, retcon maybe is the word.
Right. Yeah.
Trying to make it all make sense, trying to make it all fit together.
Who are some other short story writers, like contemporary short story writers, who kind of have that gusto from the get-go that you mentioned?
I just love it. Well, the person who said that actually is the writer Gary L. Lutz, Lutz, whose work I hugely admire. Very off-kilter, very strange stories. I think my contemporary hero as a short story writer is Deborah Eisenberg. And it was really like a photo finish to decide whether to do one of her story collections or this one. So I'm glad I get to shout her out. But she is an example of someone who writes those more capacious stories, sometimes 40, 50-page stories, but they're always still like quite zoomed in, quite rooted in, you know, day-to-day life. Most of them still only cover like a few days at most. Though the one story of hers that's not like that is one of her greatest stories called Twilight of the Superheroes. That's kind of a 9/11 story. And it follows a group of characters sort of in like the months before and after and during September 11th. So I thought about the way that story really was an influence on this novel, on Downtime. And so like, I thought about that a lot while I was writing.
Well, bouncing off of that, and before we get into your third and final book, what were some of the ones that almost made the cut? So you just mentioned that one. What were some other ones that just got edged out at the last minute?
Well, I started with like, should it be Proust? Too obvious. Like, everybody should read Proust. Everybody already knows that, I think. For my Austro-Hungarian Empire entry, I thought about The Man Without Qualities by Robert Musil, another like 1,000-page book that was literally unfinished. And I was like, that's kind of a lot to throw on the audience. I think I reached for I found myself reaching for the big ones, and then I thought like, well, and I still kind of ended up with some very heavy books, but I do love light books. I mean, I just taught a course on Fitzgerald, and he's one of my favorite writers of all time. But I'm kind of sick of talking about him, so I thought like, let's keep Fitzgerald out of this.
That's fair. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to your third and final book that you think everyone should read.
Yeah, this book, everyone should read all of these books, but everyone really should read this book, Unforgiving Years by Victor Serge. It is a masterpiece. It's devastating. It's a novel about World War II, sort of in 4 distinct parts. It's kind of a spy novel. It's kind of like a surviving the bombing of Germany novel. It's really the best novel I can think of about war, what war does to civilians. Like, it's not a book about soldiers. It's a book about ordinary people and how they survive war.
Yeah, can you speak on that a little bit more, of just like why this book is you think the best at depicting war, and specifically like how civilians fare during that?
Well, it's very unsparing. It's very matter of fact, and it's willing to become very grand and nightmarish, but also like doesn't stint on sort of quotidian details that make you care about the people as humans. And I think what I love about it is this also, it follows a bunch of different characters, and the novel sort of like hands off the narrative. The first part is like a sort of ex-Soviet spy, basically, who's now being hunted by Stalin's goons in Paris before the war. And so we're sort of in this like cloak and dagger thing. And so we're getting that aspect of sort of how governments work and how war works. And then in the next part, we're following the siege of Leningrad. And so we're there and we're seeing what that looks like, this like crazy military offensive on a civilian populace and the way they're like holding it back. And then the next part, one of the characters, has gone behind the enemy lines, and she's in Germany and she's surviving this. She's like acting as a nurse and is like just trying to save lives. And so you just see the real physical cost of this kind of bombing. And then in the last part, our spy from the first part has ended up in Mexico in exile. And he's still sort of hiding out from the Soviet people. And so it's just like an incredibly well-constructed book.
In the United States, I mean, there is no shortage of books, movies, TV shows about World War II, but it's almost always just like looking at the same part of it, namely like the American involvement, usually in the European theater. And it's like there was, so much more of that. And also like what the Russian people went through fighting the Nazis is like horrendous and also incredibly heroic. And so it sounds like it's kind of looking at that side as well too. What were some things that you learned about World War II from this that you didn't know before?
I think you're totally right that we just don't have as much of the it's not as depicted, especially for Americans. And so I think like seeing the actual human side of that, and there's like I think the best war novels are ones, and Radetzky March is very much like this too, that argue that there's nothing heroic about war, that at the end of the day, it's always civilians who suffer. It's always people who are sort of defenseless and usually innocent, who take the worst of it. And so I think more than any technical thing, that is what I learned. But from reading Victor Serge in general, I mean, he, like Joseph Roth, but even more so, just had the most fascinating life. Like he was like born into a sort of like radical anarchist family, like grew up like moving all around the world, like found himself in Russia right after the revolution, like sort of like joined the Soviet government, then became extremely disillusioned with Stalin much earlier than most other leftists, and so was immediately sort of like had a target on his back, but remained like really committed to like leftist ideals and to socialism, and so it's like he's a really interesting example of like the sort of non-Stalinist left. He's a Trotskyist basically, who kept his ideals somehow, even though he lived in poverty. He was in prison for many years, and he saw like the worst of humanity all through the war years, but sort of maintained some sense of hope or some sense of wanting to see a better world.
How did you find this book?
I think this came to me through one of my previous editors at FSG is a brilliant guy named Jeremy Davies. And he made this list of books at some point for me to read. And like every one of them proved to be like a book that really meant something to me. And so this was a book I probably read for the first time not that long ago, 5-6 years ago. And it's that really exciting feeling. It's like the book is vibrating in your hands when you're like, this is going to be a book that matters to me for the rest of my life, you know?
That's amazing. I know exactly what you're talking about. And, you know, it is, I don't know, I'll speak for myself is, you know, in my 30s, it's like, you don't get as impressed as often, you know, you don't find even, you know, books or movies or music, especially music, like you'll find stuff that you enjoy. You're like, this is nice. I really like this, but it doesn't have that kind of like, it doesn't feel like it alters the chemistry of who you are, like the molecules of who you are, which is like happens like every Thursday when you're, you know, 17. But like, so that's amazing. It still can happen. And that's what's so exciting to me about reading, and just about art in general is that like at any age you can still encounter something that like changes who you are. And so that's so cool that this book was that for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'll sort of have like, I don't know, dry spells where nothing I read or see or listen to feels exciting enough, you know, feels like it's doing that thing that I need it to do. And then something will sort of burst through somehow. And sometimes it's like when you least expect it. Sometimes it'll be a book that I've had sitting in my house for 10 years. And
yeah.
I was like, why did I move with this book 5 times? And suddenly like someone recommends it or something and it comes off the shelf and you're like, thank God I didn't listen to the naysayers.
Right. Yeah. Always hold on to them. Yeah. I am going to be moving soon. And all the like, you know, the books that I have a whole bunch of books that are in storage right now. And it's like one of those things that like bugs me about like the aesthetics of my podcast is like, I don't have a big bookshelf. It's like, guys, I promise I have the books. They're just in storage right now. But I can't get, No, they go to a different school. You don't know them. It's like, I can't bring myself to like get rid of books, even if like I didn't really enjoy it. Even if I read it and thought it was fine, like there's just something about having them on the shelf that just feels like having friends around. I don't know if you feel that way, but
oh, absolutely. It's a running debate. Sometimes it rises to the level of argument in my household. We also like live almost across the street from the main branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, so
oh man,
the books are like in storage, like right there.
Right. Yeah. It's like, do you need the physical copy? Like, yeah, that is one of those things where like, I love libraries so much. They've meant so much to me over the years and I support their mission so much, but like, I like owning the book. I was just there. I don't know if you've spent much time in LA, but there's a wonderful used bookstore here called the Iliad that is just like it's one of those places that I'm convinced is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Like you just keep walking through kind of corridors and there's oh my god there's I didn't even know this was a genre. Like then they've got a whole section of it, you know. It's like geography criticism. I'm like, what? Okay.
Dancing about architecture.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like various cats. Couldn't tell you the number, but there's like cats that just wander through.
There should always be animals in bookstores, I think. There should be animals just everywhere, I think, more than they currently are.
What are some places that you think need animals?
I think cafes in general are improved by the presence of dogs. This is, then in Europe, they don't care about these rules. Like there used to be a dog in every bar. I mean, bars 100%. Bars should always have a dog. Like that should be a law, I think.
It should be a law. Yeah. It's like the liquor license. To get the liquor license, you have to have a dog. Yeah.
I'm sort of workshopping my Subway take here.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. That's, and that's what this podcast really needs is we gotta, let's get the social clips going. I'm with you though, because I think that like it improves people's like the general mood. Like, and especially in a bar, it's like, what, you're gonna fight in front of the dog? Like I don't think so.
No fighting in front of the dog. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Because it's like they have all of the like I don't know how to phrase it, social benefits of like having a child present without any of the like downsides of having a child present, of just like, oh, don't fight in front of the kids. Like, yeah, don't be an asshole in front of my dog,
Yeah. Well, and right, the good thing versus a kid, it's like if it so happens that you fight in front of the dog, the dog's not going to be like traumatized.
Yeah, the dog's going to be probably going to be fine.
It's probably going to be fine. And the kid, you shouldn't fight in front of a kid. That's a good rule of thumb.
That's and that's the official stance of this podcast is don't fight in front of children, but you can fight in front of dogs. That's okay. Yeah. Going back to this book. If you were going to write historical fiction, what time period do you think you would write about?
I mean, I've been threatening to try to figure out this Armenian thing, but
he's going to do it.
It's a nightmare. I would say like the amazing thing I learned recently when I was trying to research Armenian history was that there was this like bank occupation by Armenian radicals of like the Istanbul, the main branch of the Ottoman Bank around like the turn of the century. And so they like burst in and they like held the bank hostage basically.
Oh, wow.
And it's just a wild historical story that I didn't know. And so like I kind of have a dream of dramatizing this episode in radical Armenian history.
Oh my God, you should. That's like Dog Day Afternoon, but right.
And they're like insisting on, various rights to be given to the Armenian people. And then they're like, and you got to give us a boat to Marseille, like we
always include a boat to Marseille. That's always, that's just, in any of your listed demands, always include that. Any kind of final thoughts, takeaways from this book or any of the books that you brought?
Well, I was trying to think about how they, like, why, because I feel like in my head I also wanted to like have them be in conversation with each other in a way, because I feel like, I don't know, there's so many little corners of literature, but I was like, well, two of these writers are Jewish. All of them are writing about like politics and like the way that politics affects normal people. They're all very much like witnesses to inhumanity in various ways. But they also all have real style. They're not these like sort of leaden epic kind of books, even though they cover like huge spans of time. Both of these novels are like 300 pages long, and they move really fast. Like the Radetzky March, it's crazy. Like when I was rereading it, it covers like, I don't know, 40 years in the first 20 pages or something. He's just,
oh wow, okay.
It sort of reminds me of like the storytelling style of like Garcia Marquez in 100 Years of Solitude. And it reminds me of that book as well, because the characters like kind of all have the same name in every generation.
Oh God. Oh man. Yeah.
Like another Von Trotta.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Do they at least have the family tree diagram like at the beginning of the... Because that was what got me through 100 Years of Solitude. Like I was like, that was
which Buendia is this?
Yeah. I'm just like, oh great, yeah, another Aureliano, I think is his name. Yeah, it's just like, oh man.
The Russians are really bad with that too. It's very hard to remember, and they all have their little honorifics, and they get
that's the thing.
Like,
yeah, it's like okay, right. Yeah, it's like this is Pietro Ilyanovich, but we also call him Bill. And it's just you just have to know that. And they don't stop and like explain that this is the same character. And so, yeah, it's funny. For the podcast in January, we did The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I don't know if you've read that. But she very much she's been on the record of talking about how it was inspired by 100 Years of Solitude. And she has a really great little kind of wink in there where because it follows a couple generations of a family, and one of the characters makes a conscious choice of we're not just going to use the same name over and over again. It's thank you. Thank you. But her take on it is that all the women in this family tree, they have different names, but they all mean the same thing. It's Clara, Blanca, Nevea, it all means white, but they at least have different names. So it's a lot easier to keep track of everyone.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things that literature can and, should do is kind of speak to what is happening and bear witness, for lack of a better term, to the horrors and the evils of our day. And so I think podcasts should do the same too. So
but they should also be fun somehow.
But they also should be fun.
That's the hard combo.
That's the hard thing. But yeah, it's to bring it back to your book, I Downtime. I think that's one of the things that I really like and admire about it is looking at this time period of COVID, which we're all for very understandable reasons trying to forget and bearing witness to it and really kind of looking at it straight on. I mean, I think to put it in a couple words, what are some of the things from that period that you think we should make sure we don't forget?
I mean, to me, the positive, there was a real moment where it felt people are recognizing how interconnected people are and how much people actually need to help each other and rely on each other. In New York, there was so much mutual aid going on. There was just, people really did sacrifice a lot to try to keep other people safe. And there was something really beautiful and noble about that. None of this is in the book, but
I didn't put any of this in the book, but this is how,
that would have been a nice thing to mention. But I think that is probably the part we should remember is a better world, as the socialists say, a better world is possible. And under extraordinary circumstances, people really do rise to the occasion sometimes. And I think the ugliness of the later debates and understandable debates in some ways about, when schools should reopen, when places should reopen, whether people should wear masks or not, that ends up being, I think, what we remember politically about it. But there was also, I think, a real period of sort of possibility. The skies cleared, the air pollution was better than it has been since before the car was invented.
Yeah. The metaphors are a little on the nose, but yeah.
The rats were thriving in New York City. They ran the city.
Oh man. Well, I'm so glad we had this conversation. Before we end, I got you a book, and as I always do, I plan to intro it at the beginning. I forget to do it, and then we get to this point, and I say, "Oh, that's right, there's a book." Anyway, I sent you a book. Do you have it at hand, close by?
I do.
All right, let's let's tear it open and let's see. I'm curious if you have read this book. I don't know if you have or not.
It's hard to find me a book that I haven't read.
I was intimidated. I had to, yeah.
Oh no, I haven't read this book.
Yes. Okay, good.
It's. Should I show it to the people?
Ohio by Stephen Markley.
I've heard it's excellent though. I
really liked it. Yeah, it's so the reason I chose this book is because I think one, it's in a mostly contemporary setting. I mean, it was written in 2018, but it's set in like 2013. It takes place over kind of a short amount of time, but it captures like it takes place over 2 or 3 nights. Maybe it's just one night actually. But you're following like 5 different characters and you're kind of seeing their whole lives that have like led up to this moment playing out. And it's really dark. It's really twisted. There's a lot of sex and it's
now you've got my interest.
Yeah, now we go. But yeah, and it also it has I think it has a lot to say about America in the 21st century. And I think he kind of swings for the fences and he doesn't always connect, but when he does, it's really cool to see. So anyway, I enjoyed this book. I hope you enjoy it as well. And
no, this is great. I've always
thrilled that I found one that you hadn't read.
No, and it's one that I've genuinely been like very curious about and somehow didn't read. And it sounds like the kind of book that I always intend to read. And then it's like, well, but it's long. But now that someone's literally given it to me, this is like the Pizza Hut thing. Like
like the Pizza Hut.
I'm gonna read it. And you're gonna send me pizza, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Just I'll just show it. Yeah, give me. If you write an essay, proving that you. But no. Andrew, thank you so much. Yeah, for being here. Where can the people find you, and where can they find your book?
They can find me.
Actually.
On Instagram? Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
However, I always, open up the floor at the end here and whatever and however you want to plug, plug away.
I think my Instagram's pretty cool. I think it's at something creative, like at Andrew H. Martin 85. Nice. It's like before I understood what Instagram was. And I still don't really. But what I would much rather people do, is get one of my books, especially downtime, from your local bookstore, would be ideal. But whatever you have to do, wherever you have to buy it, I salute you and I encourage you and I support you.
Well, if you want to pick up copy of Downtime, there is a link in the description show notes to bookshop.org, which supports local bookstores. You're able to order books from local bookstores from there. It is an affiliate link. I get a tiny commission.
Do that.
So that's my plug. But Andrew, thank you so much for being here. And to everyone watching and listening, thank you for watching and listening. And as always, keep reading.